My own father mocked my appearance at my best friend's wedding, making a cruel joke about the dress I wore right before the ceremony. He thought he was funny, the usual charming, but cutting patriarch. But what happened next made him literally spit out his expensive Cabernet Sauvignon right onto the white tablecloth during the toast. He choked, he sputtered, and he realized in front of 200 guests that his casual cruelty had just backfired in the most spectacular, career-ending way possible. All of this unfolded because of a quiet exchange I had with the groomsmen, a secret plan we'd hatched weeks ago, which culminated in a single silent, military salute delivered by the burly, stoic best man. When I tell you this man's face went from smug amusement to a mask of absolute, paralyzing terror, you need to believe me. It was the most satisfying, gut-wrenching moment of my entire adult life, and I need to know absolutely unequivocally, was I wrong for setting up a revenge that was technically harmless, but completely destroyed my father's reputation and business standing in one fell swoop? Tell me honestly, if you would have stayed silent, or if you would have let the chips fall exactly where they landed. To understand why a simple salute from a groomsman could cause my father Richard such physical distress and professional ruin, you have to know the history of our relationship and, more importantly, the history of his career. My father is, or was, a highly respected, exceptionally successful corporate attorney in our small, affluent city. He specialized in high-stakes corporate mergers and acquisitions, the kind of work that requires ruthless focus, an ironclad reputation, and a deep network of wealthy, conservative clients. He was obsessed with appearances, his, my mother's, and mine. Everything was a performance, and every performance had to be flawless, designed to maintain the illusion of the perfect, powerful, traditional family. My mother, bless her heart, spent her life managing the details of this illusion, constantly apologizing for my father's jokes, which were really just thinly veiled criticisms designed to keep everyone around him feeling slightly off balance and inferior, ensuring that his position at the top was never questioned. My entire childhood felt like an audition where I was constantly failing to meet his impossibly high, aesthetically focused standards. He hated that I pursued a career in veterinary medicine. He called it mucking around with animals instead of corporate law or finance. He hated that I prioritized comfort and practicality over high fashion. And he absolutely hated my appearance, particularly my weight, a topic he felt entitled to comment on at every family gathering, usually with a smile and a pat on the arm that made the cruelty somehow worse. He'd start sentences with, "You know, honey, if you just put the effort in," or, "That color is lovely, but it really emphasizes the, well, you know," followed by his signature smug chuckle, the kind that says, "I'm telling you this for your own good, even though it hurts." I had learned over the years to simply internalize the hurt and let the words roll off, but sometimes, like at the wedding, it just hit differently, especially on a day that was supposed to be about pure, unadulterated joy for my best friend Chloe. Chloe and I had been best friends since kindergarten, and I was thrilled to be there for her big day. I'd spent months helping her plan, and I was simply a guest, not a bridesmaid, which meant I had the freedom to wear what I liked. After years of struggling with my body image, I had finally found a dress I genuinely love at a deep emerald green, floor-length silk gown with delicate lace sleeves. It was elegant, it fit me beautifully, and most importantly, I felt confident and happy wearing it. I was walking into the reception hall, feeling great and totally ready to celebrate, when my father pulled me aside, ostensibly to adjust the shawl I was wearing, but really just to deliver one of his patented psychological torpedoes. He lowered his voice, the smile dropping away to that severe, lawyerly look he uses when he's about to dissect your life choices, and he said, "Honey, that color is beautiful truly, but you know, that cut, it really does nothing for you. It's a very forgiving dress if you know what I mean. I wish you'd worn the one your mother suggested, for the firm's sake, if nothing else." He then finished the sentence with a pointed glance at my hips and that small, cold smile that was meant to be paternal affection but felt like a razor-sharp insult. In that moment, surrounded by beautiful flowers and the buzz of happy guests, something in me snapped. It wasn't just the comment, it was the casual entitlement, the belief that he could still, after all these years, deliver this kind of low blow right before a major social event and expect me to just absorb it, smile, and manage his reputation. But what he didn't know was that this wedding was different, and one of the key players in the bridal party was about to become my unknowing accomplice in a long, simmering revenge plan, a plan that, once executed, would prove that sometimes the most effective weapon against a bully isn't an argument, but a perfectly timed, perfectly delivered piece of confidential information that, in the right context, acts like an explosive charge. The key to this entire scheme was the groom's best friend and best man, Jake. Jake wasn't just some random guy, he was a recently discharged Army Ranger, massive, stoic, and possessed of an incredibly intimidating demeanor. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was with the quiet, authoritative precision of someone who knew the value of every word. My father had never met Jake before the wedding rehearsal, but he had immediately pegged him as unpolished and rough trade, making sure to communicate his disdain through microaggressions, like pointedly talking over Jake at the dinner and constantly mentioning his own prestigious country club memberships, as if Jake's military service was somehow less valuable than his own corporate climbing. What my father also didn't know was that Jake and I had hit it off immediately at the rehearsal dinner, not romantically but professionally, because Jake, after leaving the military, had started a small but incredibly promising consulting firm specializing in security and counterintelligence for corporations, and he was quickly building a reputation as a highly effective, though expensive, contractor. We spent an hour talking shop, me about my work with animal rescue organizations that often faced corporate opposition, and him about his quiet, high-stakes security work, all the while my father was across the room, loudly pontificating about the stock market, oblivious to the quiet, powerful connection I was forging with this man he'd already judged and dismissed. During our conversation I had mentioned, almost in passing, a recurring problem I had noticed in my father's corporate life over the past year. It wasn't a secret, but it was highly sensitive. My father's firm, Richard & Associates, had been hemorrhaging clients due to massive, embarrassing, and highly public security breaches involving corporate espionage. These weren't small data leaks. These were multi-million-dollar losses where rival firms seemed to know every single strategic move before Richard & Associates could execute it. The entire business community was buzzing about it, and my father was desperately trying to keep the leaks under wraps. But the whispers were getting louder, and his reputation was rapidly being eroded. I told Jake about it not for professional advice, but just as a sort of family gossip. Dad's stressed because his whole life is collapsing from the inside out. But Jake's eyes had narrowed. He asked me a series of precise, surgical questions about the nature of the breaches, the timeline, and who had access to the data, questions that were far more sophisticated than anything the supposed security experts my father had hired had ever asked, and he had a way of listening that made me feel like every word I said was a vital piece of a puzzle. A refreshing change from my father's perpetual impatience and patronizing attitude. Jake, in his typical understated way, had listened to my summary of the security crisis and simply nodded, his face betraying nothing, but I saw the wheels turning. He hadn't offered a solution, hadn't promised anything, he just absorbed the information. Then, the night before the wedding, as we were coordinating the last details for the ceremony, Jake pulled me aside. He didn't waste time with small talk. He looked me straight in the eye and said, with that deep, resonant voice that never had to be raised to command attention, "I've cross-referenced what you told me with public records and a few reliable private contacts. I'm certain the source of your father's leaks is internal, high-level, and has been operating for over a year. I have enough to initiate a complete, discreet audit and investigation. I could shut this down, but it will be expensive and require his full, absolute, and total cooperation. He'll have to beg essentially, and he'll have to trust me completely." I looked at Jake, at this imposing man who held the key to saving or sinking my father's entire career, and a single, clear thought ran through my mind, fueled by decades of suppressed resentment over comments like the one he'd just made about my forgiving dress. He needs to realize who I am before I give him this lifeline. So, I didn't say yes and I didn't say no. I just smiled, looked him in the eye, and delivered the one phrase that Jake, the military professional, would understand. I said, "Jake, I'll only give you the signal if he gives me a reason to. If he crosses a line today, give me a discreet acknowledgement. Something only we will understand. You'll know when to move." He didn't ask what the signal was, he didn't ask what moving meant, he simply gave me a single slow, deliberate nod that communicated absolute commitment and understanding, sealing our silent, dangerous pact. A pact that was about to be triggered by my father's casual cruelty, right before the wedding ceremony began, making the entire day feel less like a celebration and more like a ticking time bomb, the fuse of which was lit by his comment about my dress. When my father made that snide comment about my forgiving dress, the comment that was the final agonizing straw, I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't even argue. I just looked him dead in the eye, gave him a small icy smile, and walked straight toward the church doors. As I passed Jake, who was standing tall and quiet next to the groom, the look on my face must have conveyed the decades of hurt and the immediate, burning sense of injustice, because he didn't need any further signal. He just looked at me, gave a slow, barely perceptible nod that acknowledged his understanding of the mission, and I knew in that instant the operation was a go. The full weight of the decision settled on me, but I didn't flinch. I spent the entire ceremony with a strange sense of calm, the quiet before the storm. I watched Chloe and her husband exchange vows, participated in the cheers, and even managed to politely navigate the family photos, all while the knowledge of the impending explosion sat like a coiled snake in my stomach. The confrontation wouldn't be public yelling or a scene, but a quiet, powerful, and irrefutable show of power that would hit my father where he was most vulnerable, his reputation and his career, the two things he valued above all else, especially his own daughter's emotional well-being, which he had so callously dismissed moments earlier. We moved to the reception, a stunning affair at the city's premier country club, the very one my father loved to boast about, with white linen, crystal glasses, and everyone dressed to the nines. The atmosphere was light, lubricated by champagne and good cheer. I made sure to sit at a table that put me in direct, clear sight of the head table where my father was seated with the groom's parents and other VIPs. The time for the toasts arrived, and my heart began to pound a heavy, rhythmic beat against my ribs. The bride's father went first, delivering a tearful, lovely speech. Then came Jake. He stood up, massive and utterly composed in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and commanded the room's attention instantly, not by shouting, but by his sheer, undeniable presence. His speech was exactly what you'd expect: brief, heartfelt, and delivered with the precision of a field brief. He spoke about honor, loyalty, and partnership, and he finished by lifting his glass in a silent toast to the happy couple, and as he was lowering it, he locked eyes with me. So that's the situation I was in. I was wearing the forgiving dress my father had just mocked, watching the entire elite of our city raise their glasses, and I had the power to save or completely derail my father's multi-million-dollar law firm through a single, silent gesture. I knew this was the one and only chance I would ever get to make him truly see me, not as the daughter who didn't live up to his aesthetic ideals, but as the woman who held the key to his professional survival. Before I tell you what happened next, the exact moment the trap sprung, and the devastating fallout that followed, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let him slide, knowing the damage it would cause to the family? Or would you have gone through with the silent plan, proving once and for all that his cruelty has a consequence? How far is too far when it comes to standing up for yourself against decades of emotional abuse? Let me know your thoughts right now, because the silence that followed Jake's toast was the loudest moment of my entire life, and I need to know if I was justified in setting this explosion off. As Jake finished his toast, he turned slightly toward the head table where my father was sitting. My father, Richard, was of course taking a massive, showy gulp of his expensive, blood-red Cabernet Sauvignon, basking in the attention of the room, completely oblivious to the quiet, terrifying tableau unfolding. Jake, with eyes still fixed on me across the room, brought his glass down slowly, and then, while every eye in the room was still focused on him, he did it. He performed a single sharp, impeccably precise military salute, snapping his right hand to his brow with a soundless finality. The salute wasn't aimed at the groom or the bride. It was aimed directly at me, the woman in the emerald green, forgiving dress. It was our secret signal, our silent acknowledgement that the mission was complete, that the information had been acknowledged, and that the ball was now entirely in my court. The whole gesture took maybe 2 seconds, but in that moment, the entire trajectory of my father's life changed forever. The sheer weight of the gesture was too much for my father. He saw the salute, he saw the man he had dismissed as unpolished acknowledge me with a gesture that spoke of serious, high-stakes military respect, and his corporate attorney mind, fueled by panic and fear over his hemorrhaging business, immediately put the pieces together. He knew that the only people who salute like that are in the serious security business, and he knew that the only person Jake could have gotten the information about his confidential corporate leaks from was me. The realization was physically staggering. His eyes locked onto mine, huge and disbelieving, and the expensive wine he had been so proudly savoring immediately left his mouth in a violent, messy spray, landing directly on the pristine white tablecloth and momentarily staining the illusion of perfection he tried so desperately to maintain. He wasn't just surprised, he was physically sickened by the realization of his own vulnerability. He saw me, not his disappointing daughter, but the single point of failure and, now, the single point of salvation for his entire professional existence, and he knew with chilling certainty that the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted, thanks entirely to the timing of his cruel comment. The gasp was audible not just from my father, but from the entire table as they witnessed the head of the firm spray wine onto the linen like a panicked teenager. My mother rushed to his side, asking if he was choking, but he waved her off, his eyes never leaving mine, a raw primal look of desperate fear and realization etched onto his face. I simply raised my glass in a slow, almost imperceptible toast to him, a silent counter salute that said I saw that. Now do you see me? Jake, the perfect professional, simply sat down, his face a mask of polite composure, having executed his part of the agreement flawlessly, leaving the wreckage for the client to deal with. The rest of the evening was a blur of polite denial and awkward attempts to clean the wine stain. My father, usually loud and boisterous, was silent and withdrawn, periodically staring at me as if I were a ghost, a terrifying, powerful specter who had just proven I could hold his entire life in the palm of my hand, if the consequences were immediate and profound. The very next morning my phone rang, and it wasn't my mother calling to smooth things over, it was my father. His voice, usually booming with authority, was tight, small, and utterly stripped of its customary arrogance. He didn't mention the dress. He didn't mention the salute. He went straight to the only thing that mattered to him, his business. He asked, not demanded, but begged, for Jake's contact information, admitting with palpable shame that he knew exactly who Jake was and what he represented, and that he understood the information had come from me. He was desperate. He offered me a significant amount of money just for the introduction, completely missing the point, as always. I told him I didn't want his money. I told him I would give him Jake's number, but only on two non-negotiable conditions, which had nothing to do with money and everything to do with decades of emotional debt. First, he had to call my mother and apologize for every time he had belittled her efforts to manage the family's image, and second, he had to publicly, openly, and unequivocally apologize to me for every single cruel comment about my weight and my career, starting with the forgiving dress comment, and he had to do it in person, without an audience, but with absolute sincerity, telling me that I was beautiful, capable, and exactly who I was meant to be, a sentiment he had never once in my life expressed without a qualifying, backhanded criticism attached. He hesitated for only a second, the struggle between his massive ego and the fear of financial ruin battling within him, but the fear won. He agreed, his voice barely a whisper, a sound of total capitulation that was more potent and satisfying than any public argument could have ever been, as it represented the complete and total demolition of his patriarchal shield, proving that when his most cherished asset, his career, was on the line, my emotional well-being suddenly became a non-negotiable priority, albeit a transactional one, but one that I was willing to enforce. I gave him Jake's contact. Within a week, Jake's firm was contracted by Richard and Associates, and within a month, Jake had rooted out the high-level internal source of the leaks. A seemingly loyal partner who had been systematically undermining the firm for a rival. And my father's business was saved from imminent collapse, but not from the emotional and professional reckoning I had engineered. He kept his word, however grudgingly. He apologized to my mother first, a strained, clumsy conversation that, while not perfect, was a massive step for him. Then came my apology. He showed up at my vet clinic unannounced, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit surrounded by the smell of hay and disinfectant, and he delivered the apology in the back office, away from his usual corporate audience. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't poetry, but it was honest. He told me he was terrified of losing his firm, and that my help, combined with Jake's, had been the only thing that saved him. He admitted his cruelty, saying, "I used your appearance to control you because I couldn't control my own business. I'm sorry, honey. That dress was beautiful, and you looked incredible." That last part, the unreserved compliment, was the hardest for him to say, and it felt like a lifetime of tension finally eased out of my shoulders. He was still the same man, but for the first time, he saw me as an equal, a powerful, connected woman who held influence, not just his daughter who needed constant correction. That was the real win, the true value of the revenge, the complete, forced paradigm shift in his perception of me, moving from object of critique to essential ally, demonstrating that my practical, mucking around career had given me the contacts necessary to save his entire, overly aesthetic corporate existence. The aftermath in the wider family and social circle was a complex mix of gossip and grudging respect. Everyone knew something major had happened at the wedding. The sight of Richard, the unflappable corporate lawyer, spitting wine onto the table had become legendary. The Whisper Network was convinced it was a health scare or a drunken outburst, but a few key people, particularly Chloe and the groom, knew the truth about Jake and me, and they backed my play completely, praising my quiet strength and long overdue stand against my father's toxic behavior. My relationship with my father is still complicated. We don't have movie-perfect hugs or frequent heart-to-hearts, but the cruelty is gone. He treats me with a new sober respect, and he often asks me for advice, particularly about security issues, valuing my connection to Jake's expertise. He has never, not once, commented on my weight or clothing since that day, and he even sends me clippings about advances in veterinary science, a small, awkward olive branch that shows he is genuinely trying to engage with my world. I proved to him, through a single, perfectly executed, silent salute, that power is not about the clothes you wear or the size you are. It's about the information you hold and the strength of the connections you forge, and sometimes the most effective form of justice isn't loud confrontation, but quiet, professional leverage delivered at the exact moment of maximal emotional impact, ensuring that the pain of the consequence far outweighs the momentary pleasure of the casual cruelty, creating a boundary that he will never, ever dare to cross again, all thanks to a forgiving green dress and a well-timed military salute that cost him a mouthful of expensive wine and a lifetime of smug self-assurance. And so, that's the complete story of how I used my best friend's wedding and a single, stoic groomsman to dismantle decades of emotional abuse from my father and change our relationship forever. It was a risky move that could have alienated my entire family, but it was the only move that guaranteed my father would finally, truly listen. I believe I was right to do what I did, because sometimes the only way to get a lifelong bully to stop is to hit them where they are most vulnerable, not out of malice, but out of necessity for your own self-respect. If you stuck with me through this entire, tense saga, thank you so much for letting me share this deeply personal moment of reckoning. Like this video if you were on my side and believe that his reaction was the perfect form of justice for a lifetime of backhanded insults. And hit that subscribe button for more true, unbelievable stories where people finally take back their power. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was the revenge too harsh, or did he absolutely deserve the public humiliation and the forced apology? I'll see you all in the next story.